Welcome viewers to yet another engagement with American literature and American drama in particular. I am discussing particularly with you American drama within the drama series, the 20th century drama series that we have been holding for the past couple of months. And today I am taking up for discussion several playwrights of the 20th century in America, which includes Clifford Odets, Thornton Wilder, Tennessee Williams, Arthur Miller, Neil Simon and Eugene O'Neill. I will be discussing in this lecture these writers and the key concerns that you find in the works in their works. Now, to begin with, really, we are going to take up certain points. So there are going to be two parts of this lecture. One where we discuss the thematic concerns of these playwrights, but at the same time look at their stagecraft and look at their artistic practice as well. What we find here is that all these artists, I have discussed with you in the previous lecture about the kind of historical nature of their works and how historicity as such is important when you look at their works. Why? Because their plays, most of them, and the plays that particularly I have taken up for discussion, most of them were presented in the 1930s and 40s. And you know that this is the period which is the period of American Depression or the Great Depression in America that took shape from 1929 onwards. And by the time you're in the 1930s, this is already a period of crisis in America where there is joblessness and lack of food, clothing, lack of security, and each individual is in a way caught in a kind of a time warp, right? So each play that I have taken up in discussion earlier as a matter of full lecture, I plan to just gloss over them, but to give you a sense of their basic concern. Right. Now, if you notice that all these plays, or all these playwrights have tried to deal with this crisis in their own way. Right. Now, on one hand, you have playwrights, for instance, like Tennessee Williams, and Eugene O'Neill, who both of them, talk about the collapse of society or take to the tragic mode, right, where they show this kind of complete helplessness of characters and a complete collapse where there is an impossibility of any kind of forward movement or any kind of optimism. You have, on the other hand, playwrights like Clifford Odets and Arthur Miller who directly aim at social criticism. I mean, they don't beat around the bush. They're right into the matter, into the heart of things, and they will talk about the social ills and and offer a social critique through their works. Clifford Odets, in fact, moves further in a direction of a kind of revolutionary politics where his theatre is seen as a kind of theatre of protest. So you see the kind of direction that each one is taking into account this kind of historical reality and then reacting or responding to that historical reality of the Great Depression and the years that followed it, right? Then finally you have a third section where where you can put in writers like Thornton Wilder and Neil Simon, who actually use the comic mode, right, in order to discuss what's going on. Now, by comic, I don't necessarily mean a kind of humor or slapstick sort of comedy. They're not, in that sense, superficial drama. Yeah, what I'm trying to say here is that the mode is different, right? So let's not mistake the comic for a kind of a superficial sort of drama. So what I mean is that here, when you notice Neil Simon or Thornton Wilder's pattern and way or process of writing, you will find that they talk about the comic but also bring in the absurd. Now, when I use the word absurd, and the theatre of absurd has now been associated as a kind of a modernist movement in itself, which has tenets of, say, existentialism and modernism. I do not also mean to suggest that here absurdity or the kind of theatre of absurd that Thornton Wilder and Neil Simon take forward, they are in that sense modernistic in way. And why am I saying that it's not modernistic? It's because that they are still centered on society. There is no rejection of the social. There is no rejection of the human. In fact, Thornton Wilder is all about cohesion. He's more of a playwright who tries to bring in an idea of universalism or brings in more kind of a talk talk about the larger human species as one body and one soul. So he's in fact taking that route. Neil Simon, on the other hand, is talking about human complexities and the oddities that exist in life. So it is absurd in the sense that they use expressionistic theater techniques, right, where you distort reality, you sometimes exaggerate and or exaggerate to the extent like Thornton Wilder does in his play The Skin of Our Teeth, where you find that a family has been living for 5,000 years, right, and they have as their pets dinosaurs and mammoths. So of course it's absurd to find that the Antrobus family living for 5,000 years, and how is it that the family is surviving? They are at once in prehistoric time and in the suburbs of New Jersey. So you see, there is a sense of play on the past and the present that all of these playwrights are really taking up. And the past is important for the American playwright, really speaking, at least the conscious American playwright, and more particularly the Jewish playwright. You see, you find that the Jewish playwrights are, particularly from this particular brand that I have been speaking to you about, that the Jewish playwright is very much interested in the past, and that is because they have all a very uneasy relationship with the past. There is whether you speak of Arthur Miller or Neil Simon or Clifford Odets, the past is a kind of a very potent landscape for this kind of a Jewish playwright, because in America, because they're constantly looking back at their own ancestors and lineage, and because of the immigrants that their forefathers were. So as a Jewish writer, they also have a sense of past alive, and they also have a sense of distance from this reality. They're already outsiders in the American culture, and so as an outsider, their view is obviously different from the writers who have gone into the melancholic mode, for instance, or gone into this kind of complete pessimism. So there is this sense of distance that these Jewish playwrights have been able to maintain, like Arthur Miller and Clifford Odets and Neil Simon as well. So the past is an important component for all American writers, really speaking, but particularly the Jewish writer. And because they have a sense of history that they're trying to revive, and a sense of past that they're constantly working around. So the play on the past is something that you will constantly see in a lot of their works, right? And another concern that these playwrights really work on is this American urban life experience. You find that almost all the plays that we have discussed in this series, they are to do with the kind of urban life and the moral failure that accompanies this urban life experience. Also because America by this time is a very largely industrial space. It is no more the kind of agricultural America that we could still speak of, say, in the 19th century, when the agricultural South, had all the power and money came into the economy through them. After the abolition of slavery, of course, it's a kind of a paradigm shift from an agricultural South to a manufacturing East, right? So America is become this kind of an urban center which has seen a large scale migration of people and the development of slums, therefore, and this kind of small pockets that all of them are living in. If you think of how, for instance, Tennessee Williams in his play The Glass Menagerie talks about how these little compartments, where these people live. In fact, the house that is inhabited by the characters in The Glass Menagerie, it's the rear of a building, and the only access to that rear of the building where their apartment is through the fire escape. Now the fire escape is of course more symbolic in the play for reasons that it is a kind of an escape route for characters to move out of their oppressive reality. And yet this urban life is almost like how Tennessee Williams talks about it. It's almost like these wasps are all living together, and there is this kind of a beehive, and all of them are just sticking to that little that they have. So talking about these warts. He also refers to this complex where they look as warts, overgrown warts, that they are unwanted warts that nobody wants in society, and they are best taken off. So in that sense, this urban American life and the moral failures that accompanies it is at the center of most of these works, particularly so in the writers who have taken the tragic turn, tragic or even the social criticism. Arthur Miller, Clifford Odets, you talk about Tennessee Williams, Arthur, all of them are talking about, or Eugene O'Neill, they're all about this kind of failed experience or failed living, and characters are failed survivors of this American experience then. And they realize their failure. So there is this, but there is this attempt to live, there is this will to live, there is this desire to live, and yet the inability to live a normal life. So, you can see this throughout as a pattern in all these plays. Even if you take Neil Simon's The Odd Couple, for instance, which came in much later in 1965, but that American society is transformed, really speaking, post the American Great Depression, that it is transformed, because if you notice the period of the 1960s, you already have a generation of people who have, who have succumbed to, for instance, some kind of abuse, or they have become completely helpless in the surroundings. So the 1960s is no different. Each one is just a failed survivor of that reality. And in 1965, when The Odd Couple came in, you saw a lot of dimensions that Neil Simon was able to talk about. The kind of failure of not just the individual experience, but also the frailty of marriage, of love, or human relationships, that was in itself symptomatic of a wider disorder that existed in society, or the malaise that existed around them, and that perhaps they were not able to trace. That is either then projected, say, tragically in some works, or comically. In Neil Simon, in The Odd Couple, it is comic and tragic in turns. You think you are hitting a tragic moment, and then it turns comic, because this character who you don't hope, but this character who is on the point of committing suicide actually comes back and decides not to do it. So you can see that how a tragedy, it's almost like a patchwork. This is tragic, and yet the writer is compelling and making it comic. So the frailty of this entire relationship that one is able to have. So not only is one a failure unto oneself, but also in terms of the relationship that one has. Talk about the family relationship in Tennessee Williams, for instance, The Glass Menagerie, where no character they all seem to be living in their own illusion and their own imaginary worlds, and that this is not a normal family, that this family is hardly able to communicate, and each one is caught in this kind of trap, right? So this contemporary urban experience or urban life is at once hostile and comic in all these plays, right? So it is a combination, you can say, of this kind of anxiety and neurosis that takes place in all these endeavors. So, and this anxiety and neurosis is perhaps most evident, for instance, in Eugene O'Neill, because when he is, when he discusses or when he brings about the life of a family, again, just as you have Tennessee Williams talk about the family life, you also have Eugene O'Neill who is centering his entire play on the family life of the Tyrons in Long Day's Journey into Night. Now remember, this play was written in 1939, which is just the beginning of the Second World War. So this is written, in fact, during the war years from 1939 to 41. Now, and as the title itself suggests, that it is a long day's journey into night, that of course at the level of stagecraft you find that this is because the play, the acts, if you just notice, just notice the acts and how they are placed. So Act 1 begins in the morning, and then Act 2, 3, 4, they are the same. So, he keeps mentioning the idea that it's the same place, Now, there is repetition, of course, that he's trying to emphasize, and yet the idea of a long journey that's almost unending, and this kind of plight that is unending of these characters. So this anxiety and neurosis you can very well see in the character of Mary in Long Day's Journey into Night, who was an morphine addict at one point in time and who relapses. So her relapse is on the surface of it a kind of a medical condition, but as his son says that it is of course it's of course the case with her, that how could she be normal, how would she not want to be addicted to it, because the kind of life that she has, being married to an actor who's always on the move, and she's had to deliver children on the way with these kind of apothecaries that she found, and not enough medical care, and what kind of life she's had. So in a way, what is being suggested here is that this anxiety and neurosis, these, the playwright spin it down to one disease or one addiction or one abuse in the play, but it is more about a social malaise that they are referring to, that this life is not a normal life, not because it's a medical condition, that is more of a diagnosis than the cause. The cause is this kind of spiraling failure of life, where people are not able to make sense of their own lives or what they in fact want. So you see this kind of tragedy being played out in Eugene O'Neill's play, just as you see this tragedy being played out in Tennessee Williams, right? So there is this kind of exploration of then human relationships that is defined by both a sense of a need to have a human relationship, and the need to have a human relationship perhaps is most evident in Neil Simon's Odd Couple, where Oscar takes in his friend Felix to stay at his place when his friend has been thrown out by the wife. Now that is his need to live with another human being. So it's not like, therefore again I say it's not modernistic, even if it's absurd, it's not moving in a kind of rejection of human relationships. It is in fact reiterating this kind of need for human relationships and the desire to have a healthy human relationship, followed by the inability or the conflict that ensues in this kind of relationship. So while individual identity is fragile in a society of mass consumerism, where you all become zombies in America, where there is no sense of real validation that exists, or where each character is lonely. For instance, when you look at Biff and Happy in Willy Loman's sons in A Death of Salesmen, you find that they are dissatisfied with their lives. Now Happy is otherwise, he's been able to get a car, and he claims he has enough girls in his life. He says, and yet I am lonely. I have a house and a car and everything I need and everything to make me feel masculine about or happy about myself, and yet he is more delusional than Biff, really, because he's unable to accept the defeat that has occurred in his life. So you see, he is a kind of a prototype in that sense of mass consumerism, as I had mentioned, and yet he mentions how lonely he is, even given the surroundings. So there is an underlying sort of an illusory truth that exists in this play, or in fact all the plays that we have discussed, that there is a presentation of an illusory truth which characters are trying to get at, and this takes me back to the discussion that I had about mass manipulation of the consumer in a consumerist society, where people are taken in by the larger ideology of the time, which is focused on money making and consumerism, so much so that the truth of their real condition is taken away from them, and therefore illusions exist in place of truth. And in fact, Tennessee Williams, in his preface, as a kind of stagecraft exercise, he says that I prefer the illusion over the truth, because there are times when the truth is so pointed and sharp that you cannot even look at it anymore, and that it is through illusion that truth can be accessed. Now that's a very interesting, and that's his idea of a plastic theatre also, that in order to access truth, now it is become imperative for playwrights to turn to illusion and then to create a sense of illusion in which the real truth may be expressed. And why is that the case? Because you see, the documents, the fact sheets will not be able to give you that truth, because everything is taken away from your gaze, right? The only truth that is available now is through feeling and what your mind can create, and that can only happen in imagination. So you find that characters are in a state of stasis in their lives, and and in enclosures that soon turn into a trap for these characters. So you find that Willy Loman is trapped in that car and in that life and in that circle of going and selling, and getting commission. So he is a salesman, but finally you have Arthur Miller tell us that, he's actually selling himself, and all he wants in life is some sense of dignity and some sense of pride and a kind of a future that he hopes for his son. He thinks his son is going to become a great wealthy businessman. He himself wants to become a businessman, but that is all a part of his desire that is manufactured and given to him. But there is one illusion that society has given you, that this is what you should be getting after and this is what you should be running after, which is money, wealth, success and achievements. And then there is this kind of illusion that the characters create, either those who reject this kind of surrounding, as Laura does in the Glass Menagerie. She decides to not enter this world of this rat race, and finally you find that each character, whether they enter the Glass Menagerie, their own glass menageries, that is their own world, which is a trap unto themselves, or they enter the world which is again a kind of a trap, they disintegrate in the plays. All these characters begin to disintegrate in the plays, whether it is Jim who will go out in the world, he's already kind of a confused, complex character, and or it is Laura who is entering the Glass Menagerie. Both of them are entering a trap and they are disintegrating in the process. At this point, I would actually like to take you to this particular quote by Clive Bloom on his text, from his text, The American Drama, just to get the sense of the age of American theatre. And let me quote from this text. And I quote, "The age of American theatre is born of a double movement, one artistic, the other political. The former particular, the latter conditioned by a general cultural shift." So you can see the shift between the artistic and the political, right? What we have been discussing. It was with the influence in the first 2 decades of the 20th century of Ibsen, Strindberg, Yeats and Nietzsche that American theatre joined the European theatre and became international. During the First World War that it found its voice, not international, but peculiarly American and introverted and intense, part of its own avant-garde. Right. So this is Clive Bloom, right? This is Clive Bloom from the text The American Drama, and this is about American drama, which has now turned authentic and more particular. So you see the progression of American drama, which is intense and introverted, which means that it has become now an American voice, that a voice that is true to its own time, right? So in terms of artistic expression also, we must remember that American drama was at the same time experimental and avant-garde and yet popular and commercial, right? So, you had the Broadway productions, you had Broadway musicals which were meant to be popular and commercial, but at the same time it was experimental in its scope. Think of the stagecrafts that you see, the kind of double, triple stages that are use of different stage levels, for instance, in the plays. If you take Clifford Odets Waiting for Lefty, you find that there is one part of the stage where the Union keeps sitting throughout while other scenes are played out in the course of the play. Different workers' lives or different lives are captured in one part of the play, and the second part of the play brings alive the Union meeting that is going on parallelly. So a sense of parallel time, and a sense of collision is expressed through different stage levels. Collision of time, collision of place is done through different stage levels. If you think of Death of a Salesman, you find that whenever Willie enters his past or enters his imagination, then he enters the foreground of the stage or the forefront of the stage. So the forefront of the stage is always for imagination, memory, or the past, right? And in this space, all characters move freely anywhere. The past combines with the present and there are no divisions there. But when the center part of the stage or further off towards the back, you find that these places have a real setting and characters only use doors to enter. They don't walk through walls. Of course, the walls are imaginary, and yet they don't walk through those imaginary walls. They maintain the decorum of the present. So Arthur Miller's the Death of a Salesman, you can see how the past and the present are created as different in a very different on the stage through different levels, where the foreground becomes this free space of the mind. So in a way, the front of the stage is actually the mind of Willy Loman, and how in his memory his sons are playing, and then some other thing comes in and a third thing comes in, just as our stream of consciousness. So the front of the stage symbolizes that, but the center and the back end of the stage is all about stark categories of the present, where you have to follow the norms. So what I'm saying is that stage direction and stage craft in itself assists the playwright to bring about a sense of continuity, but also break from the past and the present. So how they talk about how they're able to weave the past with the present. As I said, their engagement with the past is very important in all these works. Then of course you have these monologues and confessional speeches that take place, that in a way add, which are outside the text. And sometimes, for instance, in Thornton Wilder, you notice, the skin of our teeth, in the play The Skin of Our Teeth, you notice that the character Sabina keeps moving out of the play and talks to the stage managers, and stage managers are also there on the stage and saying, oh, but why did you break off the play, go back in. So you see on the stage both the character and the actor, and the alienation effect is created, with Brecht later on also is talking about and is creating in his own way. So there is a sense of break created, which shocks you, which adds absurdity, and at the same time it keeps you alert and awake of the goings on in the play. So this is how the artistic expression actually takes shape, whether it is the theatre of social realism or of protest in Clifford Odets, or it is the theatre of absurd in Thornton Wilder. These are artistic measures or medium through which the writer wants to portray this kind of a world that one inhabits, the shadowy world of burlesque, for instance, or romanticism. All this is at the center of their theatrical practice. So with this, I would really like to conclude my discussion on American theatre and suggest that it is impossible to view American theatre outside of its historical, political happenings, particularly in this phase of development, that is the first part of the 20th century. And theatre turns a new leaf in this particular part of the century, because it is able to contribute to society, to bring to people the realization of their own madness and their own blindness towards the truth. And this, I think, is the essence of American drama in the first phase, in the first half of the 20th century. I hope you've been able to draw some notes from this discussion. Thank you.